Hi, everybody. David Nour. I want to welcome you back to another session of our Curve Benders Live. I am elated to be joined by a longtime friend and a colleague and someone who's been to my home, and we spent some great quality time together. Erika Anderson is my guest. Hello, Erika.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. It's so lovely to see you, and this is going to be a great conversation. I'm thrilled.
It is great to have you. So for our audience who may not know as much about you, your background, can you start with just a couple minutes of just your background, where you've been, what you've done? You guys are doing some fabulous work that I would love to hear about.
Yeah. So I started my company, which is called Proteus, in 1990. And the reason I started it was those of you in the audience who are older may remember this. In the 80s, all these skills, leadership, management, teaming, communication, were called soft skills. Like they didn't really matter, right? And so my perception at the end of the 80s was that as everything kind of flattened out and sped up, that these were going to be the important skills. In fact, our original tagline for Proteus was skills for mastering the future. And so I wanted to start a company that really focused on those skills and that kind of consulting in order to help clients clarify and then move toward their hoped for future. So our company's always been around future readiness, helping leaders get ready for the future. And over the last 30 years, we've grown. Now we have about 25 consultants, mostly in the US, but we have 2 in Europe and 1 in South America. And we focus in 3 areas. We do what we call strengthening leaders. We have an executive coaching practice and a team coaching practice. And then what we call creating the future, where that's where our change practice lives and our vision strategy practice. And then our third practice area is called building skills and knowledge. And we do leadership and management communication skills training. That's our drill.
Love it. And the book we're going to talk about today, Change from the Outside In, is book number what? How many of these have you done?
This is my 5th book. So Change from the Inside Out is, book number 5.
And you and I talked about, we're not writing Harry Potter. We're never going to get wealthy writing books. It is an unbelievable labor of love. Why do you write? And talk a little about your writing process.
I love that question. I always, when I write books, it's always because I want to crack a code. I'm looking for some simplicity at the heart of a complex topic. And it's almost always a topic that primarily has to do with leadership. And in writing this book, the 2 codes I wanted to crack, we've had a change practice for 10 years, and we have a 5-step process that's very practical and integrates the human and nuts and bolts side of change. But I really wanted to find out 2 things kind of underneath this. I wanted to find out, why is change so hard for us? And then I wanted to find out what happens when an individual person actually does go through a change. What's that process of a person having a change come at them, and then what happens inside of them psychologically and emotionally when they actually make the change. And I thought if I could figure those out, and good news, I feel like I have good answers to those questions. I thought if I could figure that out, that would help us get underneath and solve the problem with change, which is, there's this very well-known statistic from McKinsey that 70% of change efforts fail, And when you dig into it, their research shows that the 2 main reasons that change efforts fail are lack of management support and lack of employee buy-in. So that's about change being hard and people not going through it, right? So Absolutely. That's why I want to crack those codes.
And you and I talked about this as well. People ask me, Curve Benders, did the pandemic give you the idea and you start writing? You've been thinking about this for a number of years. Maybe pandemic accelerated or became more front and center. Talk about the impact of the last 18 months on this idea for you.
Well, it's amazing how the pandemic helped me believe that the understanding I had come to about these 2 things, why is change hard and how do we go through change? I just saw it reinforced every single day. So that was helpful. And then it made me feel like, this is going to be much more, and this is why I write books, this is going to be much more broadly helpful even than I thought, because it's written primarily for people who are trying to lead others through change. But a lot of people have said to me, even in the not quite months since the book has come out, that even though they're not leaders of change, it has been helpful to them just to understand their own process of going through change, personally and professionally. So that's my hope, is that it will be helpful to much more people than it would have been otherwise.
Just a reminder for our audience, we're live on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. I'd encourage you to jump in. Erika forgets more in 5 minutes than I think I will learn in the next 10 years or so. So I would encourage you to jump in with questions. We're going to go through some of the great ideas in the book. So start with a synopsis. Start with a high-level synopsis. If I'm a leader, what is the overarching idea in the book?
The idea is that there is a simple, predictable, very powerful truth about how we go through change. And then the book, having described that, then the book talks about this 5-step change model that helps you cascade that through an entire organization so that you don't fall prey to that 70% failure rate. It's really, I know this sounds a little self-aggrandizing, but I feel like our approach to change and our model for change is the only one I've ever seen that fully integrates all the practical things that you need to do to make a change. It's the practical, make a good plan, like a big project plan, and really make sure you got all your I's, dotted and T's crossed, and attend to this human truth that people as individuals need to be supported through any change. And so that's what the book's about.
So I got to tell you, I love your table of contents, because it couldn't be more crystal clear of what I'm about to embark on, this growth and learning journey with you. It was true with, willing to be bad at first, and I love this. So you start by talking about how change itself has changed. Touch up on that for a second.
Yeah. And that's really the core of why change is hard. So the story I start out with in the book is, when I'm old enough that when I was a little kid, we got our first television. And this is when television was just a thing in the US. And then 10 years later, we got our first color TV. So that was the pace of change in the 50s and 60s. 10 years for that innovation. And that level of innovation now happens every 15 minutes, right? And so if you think back even farther, 100, 200, 500,000 years ago, people's lives, any individual human being's life, stayed pretty much the same from beginning to end, right? If my dad was a farmer, I'm likely to be a farmer. If I grew up in a certain place, my kids are going to grow up in that place. Our lives did not change very much. And so when change came, it was generally an aberration and either a threat or a danger. It was a war or a famine or a plague or an earthquake right? And so we are historically wired to think that non-change, that stability is the norm, and change is an aberration and a danger. So we're, through thousands of years of history, wired toward this kind of homeostatic urge. We want to come back to a known. And so knowing that is so helpful, because it makes sense then that people would be nervous and hesitant and resistant about change. That's what we learned. We learned that over thousands of years of conditioning, and probably even natural selection, that the safe bet is to come back to the known. So now, in this time when the level of innovation of black and white to color TV happens every 15 or 20 minutes, it's completely different than human beings have dealt with ever. And so we need to rewire ourselves to come toward change at least neutrally, because then you can figure out whether or not it's a good or a bad change. But if you come at it as a danger and a threat, you're always going to be hesitant and resistant.
Is that the biggest reason we're reluctant? Is we fear the impact on that change on our lives and work, and kind of how we deem to succeed in our respective roles?
Precisely, because if you take my historical unfolding as truth, always before, until very recently, probably the last generation or two, change was a danger, and it was the safe bet to go back to the known and to go back to what we had perceived as standard, right? And so that's deeply wired in. And so that then led me to this change arc, which is what I talk about in the next couple of chapters, is how actually do we go through a change? How do we rewire ourselves knowing this? So what we discovered is that, and the reason we call it the change arc is, an arc gets harder toward the top and then it gets easier. So this thing that we call the change arc that people go through when a change comes at them. So change comes at us, and the first thing we call it proposed change. There are some predictable things that we want to know about a change. First, we want to know, what does it mean to me? What am I personally going to have to do differently? That's the first thing we want to know. Very practical. Second thing we want to know is, why is this happening? Why are we changing? Because the status quo is our preference historically, we need a pretty good reason to change. So why do I need to change, right?
Yep.
And then the third thing we want to know is, what will it look like after the change? What's the post-change future? And it's really interesting. When I was researching this for the book, I discovered that a lot of psychologists now feel that our deepest fear is fear of the unknown. And that goes right back to, we want to come back to the known, right? So when somebody says, we're going to make this change, and they don't tell you what it will look like after the change, that's terrifying. It's like walking into a metaphorical dark alley at night, right? It's just like, well, I'm not going to do it, right? So as we're gathering this information, what does it mean for me? Why is it happening? What will it look like? Because I'm convinced now of our historical wiring, our initial mindset about that change that we're asking about is negative. It's that the change is going to be difficult and costly and weird.
Three components that are not really conducive to the process.
Exactly. And difficult means I don't know how to do it, and other people are going to get in the way of me doing it, right? It's just going to be, it's going to be so hard. Costly, it can mean time or money, but mostly it means it's going to, if I make this change, it's going to take from me things that I value. So things like identity and expertise and reputation and relationships and power. It's going to take away those things. That's what we fear, right? And then weird just means strange. It's like, this is not how we do things around here. So we start out with that mindset. And if we stay in that mindset, we don't make the change. And that's why change efforts fail. And then what we noticed is that when people do make a change, it's because either they shift their own mindset or they are helped to shift their mindset to thinking that the change could be easy, rewarding, and normal, right? Easy, or at least doable, more rewarding than costly. It will give me more than it takes away. And normal in this context means I look around and other people who I think of as my peers, who I think of as being like me, they're doing this. So that makes it seem okay and normal. And even more important, people I admire and want to emulate are doing it, which is why it's so critical for leaders to model a change. Because when people are looking to whether or not to do a change, this thing about normal is really important. And we've all seen in organizations where leaders tell people to make a change, but they're not making it themselves. Then everybody just goes, well, forget it. I'm not doing that if you're not doing it, right?
Let me ask you about the delta.
Yeah.
I've always believed if the delta of what you just mentioned is it difficult, costly, weird, to easy, the reward benefits of it are there, and not so weird. I've always believed if the delta is incremental, you're going to have a really hard time sustaining that change. Not just the initial effort, but keeping that effort, that momentum going through some period of time, which we've all seen, ups and downs. And there's some things that go well and things that just kind of don't go well. Conversely, if the delta is exponential, if I see that this will be a lot easier, or it'll be my life is going to get a heck of a lot easier. And I don't have to do that stupid paperwork or be in those meetings or, rekey the stuff in, whatever the delta is. If it's exponential and not incremental, I'm much more likely to, if I can see the light, sustain that effort over some period of time. Is that consistent with what you found?
That is a really good insight, David. And we have found that, which is why so much of the effort, when we're working through our change model with people, we say you really have to get people over that arc, which I think is the same thing that you're saying. It can't just seem slightly doable. They have to feel exactly what you're saying. Okay, I can actually do this, and I can see clearly the benefits that it's going to bring. And those benefits are personally meaningful to me. And yeah, Joe and Sally, who I like and trust, they're doing it. My boss, who I respect, she really seems to be with the program. You have, and then you have to, and I think this is what you're saying, kind of double down. The more you can do to help people see, yes, this will get us to a better place, the more likely the change is to be sustained.
So I love this, change arc. So initially it's really understanding, and gathering data to understand what I'm about to embark.
Yes.
Is the mindset shift the second kind of phase, and then kind of what happens from there?
Yeah. So then you start gathering this data. Your mindset is generally negative. Then you move or are helped to move to this more hopeful, accurate mindset. And then, and only then, when it's fascinating to observe this now that I see it, you can see when somebody's mindset shifts because they start to be willing and able to do the new behaviors that the change requires, right? So like if a company's doing a new way of invoicing, and, first they tell you, and I don't want to do that. It's going to take me a bunch of time to learn. It's probably going to be a hassle. That, difficult, costly, weird, right? And then you listen, you got to listen through it, right? And then you start saying, okay, well, we have some training, and here's somebody who's already doing it. And, here's some data from the clients that say they like it a lot better, getting invoiced and the person's mindset starts to shift. And you can tell when they sign up for the training and when they start talking about, I think clients are really going to like this, or they start saying, I talked to Joe, he thinks this is a great idea, I'm kind of on board here. So you can see by what they say and what they do, they start to do the new behaviors, and only then can the change occur. And that's what leaders need to understand. It's only when you get people over the top of that arc and a critical mass of people are seeing the change as potentially easy, rewarding, normal, and starting to behave in the new ways, that's when you have a chance of really getting adoption. Because another thing, to your earlier point about exponential change versus incremental, change in mindset, generally speaking, if the change is a good change, if it's positive and helpful, once people start doing it, that creates a wonderful positive cycle as well. They start doing it, and then they see that it actually can become easy, rewarding, and normal. So getting people to the point in their mindset when they're willing to start trying the new behaviors, often experience really is the best teacher. I mean, how many times have you, even in your own life, it's like, oh, I guess I'm going to have to do this in this new way. It's going to be pain in the ass. And then you start doing it, and it's like, oh, this isn't so bad. Oh, I can do that. Oh, yeah, I can see how that, right? So experience really moves the cycle.
But enough about, having kids and actually, making sure they survive through each of those phases. Like, how do you do this again? So, Erika, I'm fascinated that you brought up behavior necessary to do and really embark on that change, and not skills and knowledge. Because the perception is, I don't know how to do this. If I figured out how to do this, I would do it. But It really is behavior is what's going to create the impact that we're all after.
Well, think about, so I you know me, I like to unpack things. So knowledge, knowing something and having the capability leads to what? New behaviors.
Yep.
When you have new skills, you can behave differently. So that's why we tag behaviors. Behaviors are the thing that you're actually going for. Mm-hmm. And you're teaching people skills and knowledge so that they can behave differently.
Got it.
Right?
So I love it. Change arc. First, I'm gathering the potential information. Then I kind of make the mindset shift. What happens after that?
Well, then the new behaviors, people start to do them, and the change can occur. So let me then go to this 5-step change model, so think of this model. I mean, there are a lot of change models out there, but I love ours because it's a way to, as I said, cascade this change arc through a critical mass of people. So the first step in the model, usually when there's a change, there's a small group of people who are thinking about it. And usually it's a fairly senior group of people because they're looking on, they're thinking about the business holistically. So there's an example that I use in the book of a manufacturing company that decides to change the production process on their main product. So the first person who is thinking about it is the head of production, this woman who's the head of production. So she thinks, you know what, I bet, we could save a lot of time, we could do this better. So she starts thinking about it and brings it to the senior team. And they do step one of the model, which is clarify the change and why it's needed. What are we actually talking about changing, and why do we need to do this, right? Which all too often when a change happens, people don't even think about those things. So it's this small group who's thinking about that, and they do kind of risk rewards and a number of things we encourage them to do to get really clear on the change itself and why it's needed. And then step two is envision the future post-change. Both envision, literally the vision of what it will be like, and then some measures of success. Now, you notice that those first two steps are those three things that I said people want to find out first, right? What's the change? Why is it happening? What will it look like when it's done? So by having a small group of people who figures that out at the beginning, then as you bring more and more people into the tent and unfold it, you can communicate that to them. And that's the first thing they want to know. So it works really well. So in the third step, you start bringing more people into the tent. That's when you usually create the change team, like who's the team of people who are actually going to manage and drive this change through the organization. It's usually not the senior group because, they're running the business. You need people who can really dedicate their energy to this. You also think about key stakeholders. Who are the people who are neither in the senior team nor on the change team who really can affect whether or not this change is going to work? So you think about those stakeholders and how you can engage their support. And then you build the plan, the actual practical plan. Okay, if people do these things, that's usually as far as they go. In our model, then the fourth step, which is the critical step, is about the human side of change. So it's, first of all, you figure out what are the groups that are going to be most affected by this change, right? And what's going to be ending and beginning for them? What's going to be difficult, costly, and weird for them, for this particular group or this particular group? And how can I help them move? Now, you'll really like this. When we're working with people in this fourth step, we have 4 what we call change levers. And they're levers in the sense of force multipliers. You know how levers and pulleys are force multipliers? So these are 4 things that you can think about as you're creating the people part of your change plan that will really help, things you can do. So the first lever is increase understanding. As you unfold the change for people, you want to give them as much understanding as possible of the context. So what is it? Why is it happening? What will the future look like? Why did we come to this? How will it affect you? You just want to give them as much critical contextual information as you can, which again, often does not happen in organizations. It's like, just do it. That's all you need to know, right? Okay. So the second change lever, and this one may seem counterintuitive, is clarify and reinforce priorities. Because a lot of times when there's a big change, people just assume that everything is up for grabs. Everything is different. Nothing is the same. Oh my God, I don't even know what my job is anymore, right? And so if you can say to people, no, those 4 priorities that you had, 3 of them are exactly the same. They are not being affected by this change at all. And the 4th one is only being moderated. That is hugely soothing to people. Then they can put the change in context and stay focused, right?
Yep.
The third lever, and we get a lot of pushback on this one, is give control. Because when a change comes at you, especially organizationally, you often just feel victimized and at the effect, and I have no power in this situation. So as a leader, as many choices as you can give people, and you can almost always give them choices. When will this happen? How do you want to say this? What's your messaging to your people? Do you want to do it at the town hall or should we do it individually? Just get them involved in making the choices about how the change will be executed. That is so incredibly helpful to people. And it really supports engagement and supports them moving to seeing how it could be easy, rewarding, and normal. Right?
Buy-in, right? And now I'm part of this, it's not being shoved down my throat.
Exactly. And that in itself feels rewarding and normal, right? And then the 4th one is give support. And at the beginning of any change, the most important support you can give as a leader is listening. Because once you know that people are generally speaking going to start out thinking a change is difficult, costly word, whether or not they say that, then you can just listen through that. You don't have to try and talk them out of it or tell them they're being change resistant or that they should just toughen up or whatever crazy stuff people tell people. Just listen. Yeah, this is going to be a challenge. It is going to take some time. I can see how you can be nervous about this. Yeah, it's very different than how we've done things in the past. Just literally listen. And once people feel heard, then they're open to the other kinds of support you can give, the solutions. How can we make it easy? We have a training program. Do you think that will be helpful? You can then give them the practical support that they're going to need to move through their mind shift, move through that mind shift and then start to do the new behaviors.
And those levers are all focused on step 4 in the change process, which is the human side. So now I'm curious of what happens in step 5.
Okay, well, let me finish step 4. So once you've figured out using those levers to create the people plan, then you execute the people plan and the practical plan in unison. So that while the new things, the new processes or systems or whatever the change is are being put in place, people are being helped to get the information and move through their mindset shift so they'll actually do the new systems and processes, right? So then step 5, we call keep the change going. And this is back to what you were saying before. So you've got a momentum, you want to keep it going. And one of the important ways to keep it going is to make sure that the change is reaching its measures of success. And if not, why not? And change it. Change the change if you need to. Like in the example I was giving about the production process, this mythological company that was made out of a lot of companies, part of what they were doing to change the process is they were automating part of the process. And that worked really well. They brought in the automation, but then it wasn't speeding up the line the way they thought it was. And that was one of their measures of success. So they looked and they realized that what happened was the automation part was faster, but then when it came back to the human part, that was a block. It would slow down to the speed of humans. So they realized they had to make another change, which was to put double the number of people who were at the part of the process where the automation ended and it went back to human. And so that's a whole separate little sub change that they had to wire in, which often happens. I mean, you know this. Changes so often either have unintended consequences or you can't see when you're starting what's going to happen that you might have to change again. So in that step 5, not just kind of say, okay, we're done, but stay with it and make sure it works and keeps going. That's critical. And then the other thing we encourage people to do in step 5 is kind of pull the camera back and look at if very often there are things on a systemic or process or structural or even cultural level that got in the way of this particular change, but they're probably going to get in the way of other changes too. So you have an opportunity to look at elements of your organization that just might be change impeding overall and address those so that all the future changes that come down the path will be easier to make.
You mentioned you've had a change practice for over a decade, and you guys are working with some great leaders, great organizations. The 5-step change model, Erika, which one is, I don't know if there's such thing as ever easy, but which one is the easiest? And then opposite side of the coin, which one is consistently the most difficult to not just get right initially, but get right consistently?
I love that question. So I think the one that's easiest, or at least that people already are doing and understand the most, is just the part of step 3 where you make the change plan. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that they make good change plans, and they even have markers for success. But the parts that seem the most difficult are all about the people stuff. Really, like for instance, I'm doing this big project with a media company that's going really well, and they're so delightful, and they really get this, and they all read the book and bought it, but when we started the change team, the senior team went through the first 2 steps, and they nominated the change team. And I said, okay, so I'm going to need a couple of initial meetings with the change team to bring them up to speed, to help them through their change arc, to talk to them about this model and then about the first 2 steps that you guys have figured out. And it may seem like we're going backwards because we're going back over stuff but if we do that, then they'll really be ready to go to work and be the change team. And they bought it, but they're unusual. People often resist that. It's like, wait, we can just give them a piece of paper that said, no, they got to go through their arc. They have to make that mindset shift so they're really ready to work on the change. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to recognize. Once they get it, there's often a big aha. It's like, of course, we have to help people through this. But that's not intuitive for a lot of people.
For our audience, if you just joined us or you've joined us late, you're listening to Erika Anderson, founder, partner, a firm called Proteus, a longtime friend, and her brand new book, Change from the Inside Out. Say again, sorry?
Yeah, Change from the Inside Out. Sorry.
Yeah, Change from the Inside Out really tackles the mental and emotional shift that individuals kind of go through in order to make any change last. And Erika, you and I have talked about this. Those individuals also make up the team makes up the organization. So if you don't address the needs of the individual, the rest of it kind of falls apart. But are there some nuances between the individual and the team? The other thing I keep thinking is, how do you keep that rumor mill at check of, well, this is never going to work, or we tried this 20 years ago and it didn't work then. Why should we do it again? And how do you control that narrative? How do you control kind of the perceptions or misperceptions when there's lack of information or clarity from the senior team about what we're doing, why we're doing this, and where we're going?
I love that question. So I think not all, but most of that kind of people, crossing their arms and just like digging in their heels on this is going to be difficult, costly, and weird, comes because change is not done well. And what we've seen is when you kind of force the senior team to really think clearly, get clear about what is the change, why is it happening, what will it look like when it's done. And then as you bring people into the tent, first the change team and then more and more people, to really communicate those things to them that people want to hear. And then I'll go back to this again and again, really build in time to listen. So if you have the people who are saying this is terrible, this will never work, or we tried it 20 years ago and it didn't work. If you start by saying, okay, tell me about that. Tell me why you think this won't work. Tell me what's upsetting to you about this. Tell me what happened 20 years ago. Listen really, really carefully. Okay. And then really start by saying, okay, so let's just assume for a minute that this change could be a good thing and we could do it. How could we make it happen? Again, give them control, get them involved in the process. By using those tools and by really being conscious and bringing people into the fold and helping them have some agency in how the change happens, you're going to get most people. Now, you're not going to get everybody. And some people just are not, they're not going to buy it. And so you have to decide at some point, usually around step 5, if like, okay, this is not going to work for you. We're going to have to find another place for your talents, hopefully in the company, maybe not. But so I'm not saying that you can get everybody on board, but I do think that this approach is the best chance you have of getting a critical mass of people on board for important changes.
For our audience, for my own edification, because I'm taking notes as diligently as I can, repeat the 5 steps in the change model again. Just recap those for us.
First one is, what's the change and why is it needed?
Yep.
Second one is, envision the future state. What will it look like after the change has been made? The third one is build the change. So bring on the change team, actually build the plan. The fourth we call lead the transition. So it's really thinking about what people are going to need to personally go through their change arc, then layering that on top of the change plan and executing them together. And then 5 is keep the change going. Monitor to make sure that it's meeting its marks and that you're removing the impediments organizationally to this or any other change.
Again, I want to encourage our audience, if you're listening and joining us live, to jump in and ask Erika questions about this latest book, Change from Outside In. So you talk about the heart of the effort. And I also want to come back to what really makes that change impactful and the results that the leadership team is after long after. Talk about the heart for a second. And because again, since it's a soft skill, so where does the heart come in, the impact of it? Talk about that for a minute.
So the way I think about change now, having done this for a long time and now having written a book about it, is that the change has a dual heart. It has a practical heart and a human heart. So change needs to be thought through very clearly and very well. And, in the book, I talk a lot in that the chapter about step 3 about how do you actually, I only skim the surface. Project management is an art all of itself, and there are a lot of books about it. But you have to do that practical, stepwise part of the change really well. So that's half of it. But the other half is this thing we're talking about. You have to help a critical mass of people through their change arc if you really want the change to be adopted. And let me say another thing about that, Dave, because I think this is really important for leaders. A lot of times, leaders, whether or not they follow our model, they hear about a change early on. A leader does, right? And all unbeknownst to them, they go through their change arc. They start out thinking, I don't know, I'm not sure, this might be difficult, costly, and weird. And then they get themselves to the point where they think, oh, okay, I can see how this is doable. I get the rewards. My boss likes this. And okay, normal. And so they get themselves through that change arc. Takes them weeks or months. And then they turn to their people and tell them about the change. And they expect those people to be where they themselves are after months of thinking about it. But like magically, immediately, they will have already gone through their change arc and be on board. And if they're not, then they go, oh, you're so change resistant and you're so old school and you lack a sense of urgency. And so my main hope in this is that leaders will understand that people start going through their change arc the moment they hear about the change. Some people will go through it quickly. Some people will go through a long period of time. But you cannot expect people to be where you are a couple of months later after having had the chance to go through your change arc, right? So I think that if we can help leaders understand that this is an individual process, I think that will make them more patient and more supportive.
I actually refer to it as the in the Matrix movie vernacular, the blue or red pill, right? It just doesn't happen overnight. And you're right, they need some time to digest it, what you've been thinking about for some time.
Exactly.
So I'm fascinated by the idea of embracing and going along with that change. Erika, regrettably, a lot of change happens to us.
Yes.
So how do you stay motivated if you don't believe in the change as a leader? Let's just, and you could take a simple example like automating a process, or you and I've seen organizational shuffles where we're literally moving the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, right? We got bigger issues, but we're just going to change some people around and reshuffle the org structure.
Yes.
How do you as a leader stay motivated when either you don't understand or you don't believe in that kind of the biggest reason, the why and where we're going with this?
Oh, that's a great question. And let me start by saying that just because I wrote a book about change and how you can go through change and make change easier and less painful, I don't think all change is good. There's a lot of change that's ill-conceived, that's unnecessary, that's badly done. I mean, on and on and on. So as a leader, I feel like, the subtitle of the book is making you, your team, and your organization change capable. So that's really what I'm focusing on is we now live in an era of nonstop change and it's just speeding up. So if we pull back the camera a minute from any particular change, what we want to do is become more capable of making change as individuals, as groups, as organizations. I think that's how we're going to thrive in this nonstop change era. So what I think understanding, our urge toward homeostasis and then this change arc, what I think it does is it makes us able to see change neutrally, which is historically not what we've done. We've seen change negatively. So if you can see change neutrally, then you don't have all that white noise in your head telling you it's dangerous and threatening and terrible. You just see it as neutral. When a change comes at you, it's like, this could be good, this could be bad, I don't know. I'm just going to look at it neutrally and see, could it be easy, rewarding, normal? And then if you can see it neutrally, you can assess it accurately. And if you're a leader and you decide this change is terrible, it's really going to be bad for the organization, then you do everything you can in your power to let people know that and to get the change changed and to message it in a way that, and if you can't have, I know this is going to sound kind of cold, but if you can't make a change in this change, if you can't get them off of this bad change, the leaders above you, then you have to decide if it's a deal breaker. Is this change so bad that if it's made, I am not going to be able to stay and be successful? And if the answer is yes, then you have to leave.
So then does that, sorry to interrupt your thinking, does that then become more incumbent on the organization and the senior leadership team, particularly given this really tight talent market that we're seeing, be really cautious about and be intentional about the changes you bet on? Because again, too many, and you're going to drive away some really great talent.
It would be impossible for me to agree with you more, which is why, it's really interesting, doing this work with organizations. I really encourage people not to zip past this first step. What is the change? What problem are you actually trying to solve? And why is it needed? So in that first step, I just did this recently with this media company. Okay, you guys have been kind of vaguely talking about this change. What is the change? Literally, what are you talking about changing in the organization? So get very clear about that. And then do risk rewards. What are the risks of change, of making this change? What are the risks of not making the change? What are the rewards of making a change? And that's a way to get more neutral, more objective, more fair witness about it. If you can get them to do that honestly. And if it comes out that there's more rewards for doing it, more risks of not doing it, great. Let's go on. But if not, let's step back and see. Because I think you're absolutely right. Just because change is happening all the time, it doesn't mean all change is good. It doesn't mean we should make all changes. There's a cost to change. It takes, we've talked through this 5-step model. It takes a lot of time and energy to make a change. So I'm just agreeing with you in more words. I think it's absolutely critical for senior teams to make sure that the changes that they are institutionalizing in their organizations are good, are easy, rewarding, normal, can be that.
The other danger that, and I'd welcome your thoughts on this, I see is new executives in new roles. It's almost like expected the person's going to come in and turn the place upside down. And and I, my question of you is, do you believe in that scenario, new leaders in new roles make either too many changes or make changes too quickly without seeing them through because it's expected that you're going to come in and the reason you're here is the last person didn't work out and we need a new fresh blood and I'm mesmerized by shiny new toys that happen to be an executive and let's just turn the place upside down.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And when I coach very senior executives, C-level executives, if they bring me in to coach a person at the beginning, I just tell them to breathe deeply. And I say, your first couple of months is primarily to get the lay of the land. Just really, you don't know enough to know whether or not you should make changes. Just do a lot of listening, take in a lot of data, make sure you understand the current state before you decide to do something different. So I absolutely agree with you. And in fact, a lot of bad change, I think, is new executives wanting to make their mark. It's like, if you really want to make your mark long-term, stop, take a breath, look around,
The other thing I appreciate about your book was this idea of I start change in my department, in my function. Now, for it to really succeed, for it to really sustain long-term, it needs to kind of cascade or go far and wide and deep through the organization.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about this. I see the value of it. How are you advocating implementation of that change, Erika, without the authority, without I have no control over the APAC or I have no control over that functional group.
Yeah.
And almost like you can't help but feel like I'm forcing that change on them. So how do you really get this across the organization?
That's a great question. So if let's say you're somebody who's kind of up near the top of the organization, you're the head of a department, right? You're maybe a couple of levels down from the CEO. and you think, oh my gosh, if we made this change in our department, it would really help the whole organization. So then again, back to the 5-step model, you have to really get clear about what is the change and why it's needed, because then you understand whether you need other support. I mean, there are some changes that just live within an area that you can just decide, as long as your boss says it's an okay idea, and it really doesn't, you can make the change within your area. So one of the important aspects of understanding the change clearly is you really start to understand where the tentacles of it are. In order to be successful, do I have to have support of finance? Do I have to have the support of legal? Do I have to go up all the way to CEO or not? And get clear about the level of support and understanding collaboration you need on a particular change to make it successful.
You've brought up several times leaders. You and I work with leaders. We kind of, you hate to say, we kind of understand their DNA. And
yeah.
Do you believe change can be initiated and embraced from bottom up? If I'm a frontline person, and I see, whether on that manufacturing line or I see in our delivery of our professional services, what we do today isn't working. It's just the way we've always done it, but it needs to be refreshed, updated, enhanced, whatever. Yeah. How do you envision, how do you coach individual contributors to kind of bubble that change and bring it up to the organization, particularly if it's going to be disruptive, particularly if it's going to be, challenging to the status quo?
I love that question. So I'm going to respond both from the point of view of the, frontline or first couple line person, people who see a change and want to make it, and also from the leader. So as a leader, I think it's absolutely critical. There's been a lot of research that shows that one of the biggest derailers for leaders is not listening to the feedback that bubbles up from their organization. So just be attentive. If you're a leader and in the last 6 months, you've heard from 4 different people that a process is not working well, the process is probably not working well, So don't discount that. Just be open. So that's what I would say to leaders. And for that frontline person, it's the same thing that I'm saying for anybody. Think about what's the change and why it's needed, so that you can make the case to your boss, and then if necessary, your boss's boss and your boss' boss. And one thing that's really helpful that I've often said to, people further down in the organization, don't come with a complaint, come with a request. So if you go to your boss and just say, this process sucks and it's terrible and it's complete pain and we all hate it, they're just going to think you're a whiner. But if you come and say, we really need to improve this process, and I think if we improve this process in these ways, it would have these great results. That's a request versus a complaint. And a request helps people see what's the change, why is it needed, what's the future that will happen when we make it, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I also coach a lot of those frontline contributors that the more visible, the more impactful, the more value creation minded you become, better chance of getting promoted, add additional realms of responsibility, so on and so forth. It's also
let me interrupt you for a minute, because that's a really good point, that it's both the message and the messenger. So if you come with requests versus complaints, and you already have credibility as a person who really is helping and really is doing their job and really trying to get better, then that's the golden combo.
And I'm building on that. Does it also make sense logically to volunteer? Hey, I'm willing to, beyond my current responsibilities, also kind of drive this or lead this, or I want to be a part of this team. And so not just here's something we should do, but let me kind of embrace that broader responsibility of actually getting that change implemented.
1000%. And that, boy, this media company that I'm working with, this big change, and it's the change to a lot of media companies. I won't get too geeked out about this, but because media isn't just television anymore, media companies can no longer just sell based on ratings, based on like Nielsen ratings. They're moving to selling based on impressions across all of their platforms. And that's a huge shift that all media companies are having to make. And and it affects every part of their business. And we're working with one of our clients to help them do this. And it's going to be probably a 3-year shift. And when the senior team nominated the change team, the 12 people who are really going to clarify and manage and drive this change, every single, I was in that, I was facilitating that session, and every single one of the people on that team were people that the senior team said, this person will help. This person will move this forward. This person is solution oriented. This person will help get this done. None of them were just like, oh, this person's a pain, I guess we should put them on that. You know, they were all exactly what you're saying. They were people who the senior team knew would step up, and they did. I mean, it was really fun to hear then from the executive sponsor and the leader of the team that everybody who had been nominated was honored and excited. And now we've had some meetings and they're on it, you know, so definitely that's a real positive.
In your typical style of ensuring that your ideas are also practical, pragmatic, insightful, and actionable, I love that you wrap the book up with becoming kind of a change capable.
Yes.
So give our audience maybe, I don't know, 2-3 ideas on what can I do? How do I ensure something you alluded to, which is become better at not just seeing that change as neutral, but embracing it and actually implementing it and getting it done with a lot less white hair, or the ones that are leaving.
Yeah, exactly. So the two things I would suggest for leaders particularly are get better at making that mindset shift. So what that means is when a change comes at you, notice how you're talking to yourself about it. And if you're like 99.9% of human beings I know, especially if it's not your idea and it's coming at you, your first thoughts are going to be about how, oh, it's going to be hard. I know how to do this, and it'll make me look stupid. That's what it will cost, and it'll take a long time. And that's what it will cost. You know, your first thoughts will be about how it's going to be difficult, costly, and weird. Just notice that. And then get curious. Ask yourself, okay, all right, I can see why I think this. Now, how could I make it easy? How could it be rewarding? How could I normalize it? Just shift your self-talk. Turn your mind toward how you could make it work. And just that habit of consciously shifting out of your historically deeply wired change is going to be bad, that's hugely powerful. I even though I know this, I watch myself do it every day. My husband just the other day prescribed some change, in how we approached our life. It was just this dumb thing. It was what we're going to do in something in our yard, And I saw my initial reaction was, oh, I don't want it. That's going to be a weirdo, right? And so I just noticed and I stopped and I said, okay, wait, hold up. All right. How could it be? Oh, it's not that going to be that big of a deal. Yeah, I guess. Okay. All right. I guess it's, I just shifted my mindset. So it's wonderful to have that power to consciously shift how you think about something,
Love it. And I think it's something that as you said, in Curve Benders, I've done a ton of research that change is not going to stop, and that disruptions that we're all facing, and not only is not going to even slow down, it's actually, we believe, is going to accelerate. So that the change capable skills, knowledge, and behaviors you're advocating, I think it's unequivocally no longer a luxury, it's a necessity for any leader to lead.
God, yes, and then the second, so the first thing is just, work on your own mindset. And then the second is turn and do that with your people. So it's the same thing. It's recognize because our self-talk leaks out of our mouth. So you tell your people about a change and they're like, I don't know, this is going to be da, da, da. Start by listening. Just start by listening. People want to be understood even more than they want to be agreed with. So just start by listening. And once you've listened all the way through to, okay, you got me, then you can start asking them those same questions you ask inside your own head. Well, how could we make it easy? What do you think we could do to make this more rewarding? How could we make this change normal? And start having that conversation. And that's how you help people shift their mindset.
Appreciate Brian Gorman jumping in. Powerful framework for approaching change. Thank you. You're exactly right. This is again, quintessentially Erika Anderson. As long as I've known her, great ideas, simplified, the complexity of it, and making it implementable. Erika, how can our audience learn more about you, more about your work, more about this book?
Well, I love that question. So the easiest place to go is my website, which is my name, which is spelled oddly, ErikaAndersen, ErikaAndersen.com. And you can find out about the book and about my podcast and also about my company, or you can go directly to the proteus-international.com website. Either one of those would be great.
And we'll share those in the comment sections and all those. So thank you, Erika. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for the insights. Again, Erika Anderson, founder, principal, Proteus. The book is Change from Outside In.
Inside in.
Inside, I see. This is why it needs to be reinforced. Inside, outside. I think it's really important insights and critical data that we all can benefit from. As a reminder, our audience, Curve Benders talks a lot about change, talks a lot about future of work and how your relationships can become enormous enablers of your success in that journey. I hope this session has been useful to you. I took several pages of notes. Erika's always delightful to be around. So thank you for joining us. Remember, Tuesdays at noon Eastern, we're going to continue to do these Curve Benders live with great authors, friends, executives who are not just surviving amidst this chaos and this time of change, but actually finding ways to thrive through it. So on behalf of Erika, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.